We're so happy to be continuing the series. We've been in relationship with the Tel Aviv books, Olga and Gilad, for the last couple of years, and we were honored to have an event about a year and a half ago, I think, right? Where the Tel Aviv Review of Books is doing something really different. Is it tries to put forth a multivocal look at Israeli society, and we've been blessed to be in partnership and relationship and are very excited for this evening. This series is really to think about the way American Judaism and the Jewish people are at a crossroads post-October 7th, post the Gaza war. And this particular evening is really to look at what used to be normative assumptions about Israel-Diaspora relationships would function, and kind of even base assumptions within Israeli society about basic norms of what it meant to be a Jewish and democratic state, and how particularly American diaspora Jewry would be in relationship. And really post-October 7th, many of those questions, those assumptions are really being questioned from all different avenues of life. If you want to think about it left to right, lots of differences, both on the political front and really also on essential questions about Zionism and Jewish peoplehood that we hope will get a window into this evening. So we're really honored to have, I'll first introduce our moderator, Dr. Flora Casson, Refuah Shlema, who is the Levine Family Director of the Brandeis Center for Jewish Studies and a Senior Fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America, a scholar of early modern Jewish history. She also strives to bring Jewish scholarship into public life. Her writing has appeared in Haaretz, The Forward, Slate, Ayin, Sources, and Smithsonian Magazine. Her new book, Mazal Tov, Stained Glass, A Reflective History of Anti-Semitism, will be published in 2 weeks by the New Jewish Press. Keep your eyes out. It's a poignant blend of memoir and history that explores Jewish identity in post-Holocaust Europe and reflects on the persistence of anti-Semitism across generations and continents. And I just want to also acknowledge that given a lot of what's going on in the world in anti-Semitism, of course, there was a terrible attack on a synagogue in West Bloomfield, Michigan, a large Reform synagogue in Bloomfield, Michigan this afternoon. Thank God no one was hurt, but a truck was rammed into the synagogue and there was a fire and the attacker was killed. But of course, it's one more instance of a lot of worry and rising anti-Semitism in our own country. So we're holding the community of West Bloomfield, Michigan, particularly in our hearts tonight. And now I have the honor of introducing the co-founders and editors of the Tel Aviv Review of Books. Gilad Halpern is a co-host at the Tel Aviv Review podcast. He is a founding co-editor of the Tel Aviv Review of Books, a journalist by training. He is also a scholar of the history of journalism. And Olga Kirschbaum-Shirazki is the founding co-editor of the Tel Aviv Review of Books and a visiting fellow at the Tel Aviv Institute. A historian by training with a focus on modern Europe, she has taught and published on intercultural relations and modern politics. So I want to give a couple of other instructions before we head off into the panel that Dr. Casson will facilitate. One is Gilad made it to New York, so he's in his hotel room. Olga unfortunately couldn't leave Israel, and there has already been one siren this evening. And so if there is a siren, she'll have to, there's a warning, and then you have a period of time to get to the shelter. Her shelter is across the street. So she'll have to take pause from us for a period of time. We obviously hope that's not the case, and most importantly, want to keep her and her family safe. So just to understand that's an awareness of this evening. And then in terms of questions, surely people should direct the questions to you.
Yeah, if people can send questions directly to me, then I'll be able to consolidate and pose them to our speakers when we get to the Q&A.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So, Dr. Casson, take it away. Thank you for being here, everyone, and thank you, Olga and Gilad and Flora, for guiding us tonight.
Thank you very much, and I'm very honored to be here with Gilad and Olga, and with all of you who joined us on Zoom. I know we all want to talk about, Israel and American Jews and everything that happened since October 7 and maybe the war in Iran, but I wanted to start with a few words about the Tel Aviv Review of Books, because I think it occupies a very special place in the landscape of English language newspapers, and I mean not newspapers, but maybe journals or magazines in Israel. And when I think about it, I'm reminded of an interview I heard a few years ago. David Grossman, the Israeli novelist, was remembering as a child his father gave him a book by Shalom Aleichem, and he started reading it and he loved it, and then he read all his books. And years later, he thought of it as his father, who never talked about Eastern Europe, where he was born, and that culture. And he talked about reading those books as a kind of tunnel that his father gave him to the culture and the world in which he grew up. And I feel that's a little bit what you are giving us with the Tel Aviv Review of Books, a kind of tunnel to Israeli culture, because so many of our conversations focus on politics and war and all those difficult topics, and they should. But it's good sometimes to remember that there are also a lot of people, a lot of creative people in Israel. And just looking at, the front page on your webpage, it's obvious there's poetry, there's fiction, there's politics, there's analysis. But you're giving us that tunnel. And for that, I'm grateful. And you're not only giving us that tunnel, but how you do it is special, because you're very deeply committed to nonpartisanship, right? Nonpartisanship religiously, nonpartisanship politically, and to that goal of, and I think Felicia mentioned it, giving voice to many different right people in Israeli society. And so I want to start with asking you about that. Why did you decide to do that? And how does that work in a world that is so polarized and becoming more polarized every day? How do you how do you do that? How do you decide who gets a voice? How do you keep people who don't agree in the same room? Um, yeah, just tell us about that.
Gilad,
Do you want to start? You go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, okay, so I'll start. Thank you, Gilad, and for graciously letting me start. That already shows you we just check in with each other. I think the first thing, at least for me, I'll speak for myself and why I joined the project and why I'm committed to these different perspectives, is I think that it's important to learn. I think that all of us at the Tel Aviv Review Books, all of us editors, we have our own clear political, religious, ideological, even cultural tastes. And we don't feel that we have to betray those, but at least I feel there's a value in reading and learning about different perspectives. And that, in fact, if you don't do that, you dull your own perspective. And so there's something, so doesn't learning and showing the world these different perspectives, which is what we do. So it's first us as editors learning and from what we publish, but then showing to others is an idea that we hope that whatever grains of truth might be in somewhere that you don't expect them can be seen and understood. So that's a dialectical value. And then afterwards, Israel's a very diverse place, and a lot of the material doesn't get to the English-speaking audience. And so we were very committed from the outset to translations and to providing this range, because again, we thought, from a philosophical perspective, it's important for people to see the range of Israeli society. So that's my commitment to it.
Yeah, well, I will say one thing about our being Israeli, which I think is really important here and maybe conducive to a better or more nuanced debate. As you can probably hear from my accent, I am an Anglophile. I've always been an Anglophile. Even though I'm a native Israeli, Hebrew was my mother tongue. I took a liking to English from a very young age and made it really my vocation. And the way I saw myself as an Anglophile is the way that I learned or started to think about diaspora Jews, especially in the English-speaking world, that having worked for English language media, for newspapers, I was an editor at Haaretz English and Ynet News and other English publications. Obviously the main readership of these publications and people that I was communicating with were English-speaking diaspora Jews, and not coming from that world, I had to learn about, well, you guys essentially. And going back to my Anglophilia, I said to myself, when I want to do my kind of journalism, I want to address the mirror image of myself. So people who are not Israeli, but have an Israelophilia, if you will, who want to know a lot about Israel, who care deeply about Israel, whether they, from a sympathetic point of view or not. I mean, it doesn't mean that you have to be a fervent Zionist in order to be interested and care about Israel. But what I think that the Tel Aviv Review of Books and me personally, I would prefer to speak for me personally, but I think it reflects also in the Tel Aviv Review of Books, is really to put a wedge between people's Zionism and their Israelophilia. So to talk about Israel, but beyond the very basic political debate that we're usually having, that I think is a cul-de-sac at the end of the day. I mean, this is perhaps, at least my assumption, that is the cause for this polarization, for the fact that people don't really listen to each other, don't talk to each other. And I think that, everything that Israel stands for, other than, its relationship with the Palestinians or, with its ideological project, is something that people who care about Israel, who are interested in Israel, can come together over. So I think this is more or less my credo, and I think that this is something that I can speak for Olga and myself. I think that out of the team of 5 who are the co-editors of the Tel Aviv Review of Books, Olga and I are at the far ends of the political spectrum, each from our own perspective. But I think that also in between, this is something that we can all discuss and agree upon.
Thank you. And so how do you decide what you publish? How do you bring the two sides into conversation? How do you stay in conversation sometimes? And I'm guessing, if I can reveal your positions to the audience, right? Olga, you would be more on what we call the right, and Gilad, I guess you would be more on what we call the left. But so how do you do that, and how do your readers react? Do you feel because you're occupying a very special place, right? It's possible today to just live in your news bubble and never do that. And do you feel that, the readers respond to that?
Yeah, if I can take that, Olga, I'll just start by saying that, I'll let you in on a little secret from the editorial world. Usually what you publish is what your writers actually file. There's a whole process of things that fall through the cracks way before that happens, and that is very frustrating sometimes for an editor who wants like a very rounded and very comprehensive lineup. But then, at least the 3 of us are writers, and we know how difficult it is to turn in a copy. But let's put that aside for a second. I think that one of the things that the features that have enabled us to do that is what we call the dual review, and by dual is DUEL. And this feature that has also been pretty difficult to produce, but essentially what it means is that we give a certain book with a certain thesis that is controversial to several to two reviewers on both sides of the spectrum. So people would have maybe contradictory or at least differing opinions on the, or at least we assume they have differing opinions on the subject matter. And then they both write their reviews and we run them side by side. So, for example, this may ring a bell. One of the best dual reviews that we had was from a few years ago. Yuli Novak, who was then the CEO of Breaking the Silence, the veteran association that was dedicated to talking freely about the thoughts of the occupation and what the Israeli army does in the West Bank, who's now the CEO of B'Tselem, the human rights organization. So she wrote a book. In between those jobs, she wrote a memoir revealing her, I don't know, political trajectory and her experiences. And we gave it to two pretty high-profile reviewers. One of them is Einat Wilf, that you may know. She's a former member of Knesset and an intellectual who is fairly hardline, I would say. She's an oddball in many ways. I mean, she's hard to be pigeonholed politically, but when it comes to the Palestinians, she's a hardliner. And on the other hand, Avram Borg, who was also the Speaker of the Knesset and then a member of the Knesset for the Labour Party for a long time, but he and the chairman of the Jewish Agency also at the end of his political career, and who has over the last 20 odd years has moved steadily into the anti-Zionist left and is I think is probably the Israeli equivalent of Peter Beinart, because he also comes from a religious background and has had a moment of grappling with his Zionism that has led him into anti-Zionism. So we had these two pieces and we ran them together. They're both available on the website. You're welcome to look them up. And I think this is something that really presents a picture. And I think that Olga, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the reactions to this kind of layout have been very positive.
Yeah, so I want to add to it that the issue is curiosity. If you're open to reading someone that you don't agree with, because you think there's value in understanding what your opponents say, if only to sharpen your own position. But is there factual information there that you ought to know? Are there philosophical, ideological, political considerations that you ought to have in your mind? So I think it's that commitment. So Gilad and I publish many things that we disagree with deeply, but our criteria is there a quality of engagement there? Is there a quality of argument and writing? And is it bringing something that we think people ought to know about the conversation, if only to represent perspectives that people ought to know about? So and so the value of being informed, I think it's quite. I think actually it's dangerous not to know what the range of people think, even the people you disagree with. So that's and I would say, though, in terms of the we can get into it, but I don't consider myself to be right wing at all. In fact, I think that the current left-right designation of Israeli politics and Middle Eastern politics is backwards. And I can get into why I think that's true. I wrote an essay about that. So so that's what I say. So the dual review encapsulates that, but it's our respect for presenting these voices. And so we give, there's the way that it works, we're very democratic. So the editors, all of us editors, get pieces we think are of value. And it's rarely happened that we vetoed each other's pieces because we have that mutual respect of putting the information out there, having and the acceptance that we're going to be publishing things we don't like, that we don't agree with. And I would say for the contributors that because we have no editorial line, they're not signing on to something. And there's something liberating about that. I think a lot of people are worried about publishing in such and such a review or showing up in such and such a place. And that becomes very confining and constraining because suddenly, where are you going to talk? Who are you going to talk to? You know, and here we say, look, you're not, you're not pigeonholed by your participation in our journal at all. And then for the readers, you just never know what you're going to get, which is also a bit exciting. You know, you're gonna get a title, and you might expect a certain direction, and it might offer something else.
So moving on now to Israel diaspora relations. From your right vantage point at the Review, as a place that publishes that range of opinions and ideas, and given how sort of difficult and complicated the situation in Israel has been in recent years, and people are so divided about it, but also I think this has maybe, some people have wondered if we're at a kind of turning point, right, in the relations between Israel and the diaspora, and especially the American diaspora, right, the American Jewish community, that Anglophone, right, Jewish world that you are trying to invite into Israeli culture. And I'm curious what is your diagnosis of this situation, right? In that post-October 7 environment where you have, war after war in Israel, where you have a shift to the right in both Israeli and American societies, but maybe where the American Jewish community is still much more on the left than it seems in Israel. How do you see that relation evolving and taking shape in the current context?
You want to go first, Gilad, or would you like
No,
me
go
to?
ahead. I'll give it to you.
So I would say that I would start off by saying that one of the differences between Israel and the American Jewish community is that there's a portion of the Israeli public that's living what I call the regional political reality. And what I mean by that is that there's a whole new geopolitical reality that's opening up. Modi came to visit India. India and Israeli relations are improving. There's increasing involvement with the minorities in Syria. I'm involved in programs with Kurdish intellectuals. There's a whole regional reconfiguration. And in that story, among the, if we look at so the other Middle Eastern minorities, particularly Kurds and Druze, but then you look at places like Azerbaijan that are kind of peripheral to the Middle East, but involved. You look at the Abraham Accords partners, and that in that regional story, Israel's not the villain. In fact, Israel's part of the new architecture that opposes what they view as the villain, the Islamist side. So if you view the current conflicts within that framework, which is the framework that a lot of Israelis view it in, then in some ways, the story right now in Israel is better than it's been in a long time. Israel has never had regional allies and partners, including in this contemporary conflict with Iran, and I'm not talking about the US at the moment, at any point of its history to the extent that it has today. And so if you're in the regional frame and you're thinking, and really the whole region is in a dynamic period that hasn't really been as dynamic since the end of World War I, right? When the new states, the post-Ottoman states were created, and some of which were not created, like Kurdistan and other places. So in that frame, the discussions are positive, expansive. They're, and then if you're in the frame, which is primarily what I would call the Oslo frame, which is not a regional frame, but rather focused specifically on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, then there's more division. So even if you take the contemporary war within Israeli society, very high support for the war in the context of regional Islamist, anti-Islamist confrontation. And then on the question of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I think that there's more more difference. I think in the American Jewish community, so going back, I think that regional frame is becoming somewhat more apparent to the American Jewish diaspora. But I think for the American Jewish diaspora, still, given the what I call the Israeli-Palestinian frame, is much more dominant, and in the West, and there, Israel is viewed much more negatively. So I think that's so part of the sort of, if you will, the tension is in those two frames, so and that's in terms of diagnosing the problem. I don't want to talk too long. I want to give Gilad a chance, and we can go back into saying a bit more. But I'll let him talk now too.
Well, obviously, despite all the developments that Olga's describing, and there's great truth to what you're saying, and how Israelis are perceiving their place in the Middle East. Olga didn't mention the Abraham Accords, but this is of course a major development in that sense. Still, the story always reverts back to the Palestinian issue, and it is a divisive issue, and it's also a burning issue. And part of the fact that it's a burning issue is because for so many years, especially under the Netanyahu government, Israel has done whatever it could to avoid the Palestinian issue and basically kick that can down the road. Now, it has obviously repercussions for Israel's security. I mean, the best example is, of course, the 7th of October, but also many more minor events of confrontation between Israelis and Palestinians, be it terrorist attacks and other sorts of events and incidents in the West Bank between settlers and Palestinian communities. But it also reflects to the wider world, and as much as Israel gets closer to regional allies, and many Israelis feel perhaps more confident in the place in the Middle East, there is a growing wedge between Israel and its erstwhile allies, Europe and the United States, and the democratic, the free world, as it used to be called in general. And within that, and I think that this is really the Palestinian issue is really the heart of the matter here, because it's not just the one thing that allows all these divisions, whether it's between Israel and its allies, whether it's between Israel's supporters and detractors in those countries, whether it's within the Jewish communities in those countries and the diasporas around the world. I think that what it basically does, that it really intensifies and amplifies these tensions and polarizations. And I think that, regardless of how you think the Palestinian issue should be resolved, I think that recognizing that it has to be resolved sooner rather than later in whatever way people can agree on, at least work towards a certain resolution of that issue, is something that I think would solve many of our problems, not all of them, but I think definitely Israel's diplomatic relations with the outside world, that hasn't been great since the war in Gaza. And also, I think that it would resolve a lot of the tensions within Israel's so let's call it the Israel community in the world, whether it's Jews or non-Jews, but people who want who wish the best for Israel, who are not like died in the war, anti-Zionists who want all the Jews to go to Europe. I think that these are really a tiny minority. The other people who want the best for Israel will be able to agree on much more if the Palestinian issue is resolved.
So,
Right.
so I want to just follow up on it. This is where Gilad and I disagree, and so we're going to model disagreement. And I think the Palestinian issue is made an issue in the sense that if you look at the region, and again you take the regional frame, nobody's making the Kurdish issue an issue for the Turks. Even though it's a burning issue, they're the largest stateless people in the region by far, right? 40 million. And under very difficult conditions, they fought ISIS, and still their autonomy in Syria was not guaranteed because of primarily Turkish pressure. So the Palestinian issue is an issue primarily because Western countries, and now it's primarily Western countries, there's a big division between Eastern Europe or countries in Asia or even Abraham Accord partners and Western countries and Latin American countries who are and certain Muslim countries in North Africa who are ideologically committed to the Palestinian cause, and whether in its maximalist form or in its minimalist form. And that's what's driving it. It's not, we do not live in a world on a rational level. We don't live in a world where people are always fundamentally concerned with resolving national conflicts. In fact, we live in a world where countries can occupy very easily, as they do, as Turkey has done, that China does, etc. So this is made a central issue. And it was for a long time made an issue as part of an architecture for the region of balancing Iran within the region, an architecture that started with the Carter administration and continued afterwards, and is part of a European policy also to balance Islamists and other actors, including Turkey, right? There's no strong repercussions for Turkey on many things, because that has been that was viewed as a preferable policy to the policy of taking a strong stance against these actors. And that what's different now, and where I would say that we have a chance of resolving the Palestinian issue, is that unlike previously, we're beginning to have regional Arab actors in the Palestinian issue. The Palestinians have never operated alone. They've always operated with other state actors in every war from 48, 67, 73, and then most recently with Islamist state actors in their funding from Iran and Turkey. We now have regional state actors who have, on both the ideological nationalist level, but also on the religious level, are looking to moderate the stance and to come. And I think that's different even from Oslo. Oslo had no religious dimension. Oslo, unlike the Abraham Accords partners, where there's an element of interfaith reconciliation, Oslo was a political sort of a resolution based on kind of the two secular and also not really regional. Although the Oslo Agreement was technically supposed to bring in Assad afterwards. What was supposed to happen was Egypt, Jordan, and then there would be the two states, and then Assad would sign. So to make that brief, where I disagree with Gilad is I don't think it's Israel's not resolving the Palestinian issue, or for that matter, the Palestinian leadership not resolving the Palestinian issue. I think that there's an interest in a certain part of the international community, particularly Western Europe, and parts of the United States and parts of the West, less so in the rest of and some other parts of the world, in North Africa and the rest of it, in the Middle East, to keep this issue alive, right, and to keep it central. And I have more to say about that, but I will go on.
Can I just make two very brief comments and then go back to you,
if I can rephrase a little bit, because this is really interesting, right? And this is the tunnel I was talking about, right? You're giving us this kind of view in the Israeli conversation. And if I can describe what I'm observing here, and of course the American Jewish community is big and diverse and there are many different opinions, but where I see that kind of rift maybe appearing is on the one hand, there's a worry about democracy, right? There's a worry that Israeli society and, American society too, but, when American Jews look at Israel, they often see a society that is drifting away from democracy. And to push back a little bit on Olga, maybe the Palestinian issue is made or not made, but you can't argue against the reality of a group of people who live in very close proximity with Israeli Jews, not having the same rights and so on, right? And so I think a lot of American Jews are looking at that and are thinking, that if we're part of that large Jewish community together, and for us, democracy is so important, and, what's going on there. And then the second topic where I kind of see a growing rift, and again, I'm schematizing, is where again you, Olga, you sort of project that kind of post World War I small nations wanting their independence and so on. That I think you are correct. We don't see that from America, right? That has been sort of been a constant conflict in the Middle East. But I think what people are seeing also from here is maybe a growing messianic drive that is driving it more than maybe, it's not, okay, we're going to be two nations and we just want borders. It's, God said we can have it all. And all of them think that, right? Not just Israeli Jews. And I think from, at least that's what I'm seeing, right? There are these two topics where you're kind of seeing a growing rift between, I think, the American and Israeli Jewish communities. And if you think that, right, in the 20th century, these became the two large centers of, right, Judaism in the world, and for a while, they seem to be going in the same direction, and now they seem to be going in a different directions. And what does that mean for Judaism? And how do you see that from Israel? And what would you say to American Jews? Do you think, right, about Israel, to explain, to help them understand what is going on, or to maybe, say if they can do something, have an impact? How would you address that sort of growing separation?
Gilad, you want to go first?
Yeah, well, I would just say that yeah, well, I actually I agree with you, Flora, in what you said, that it's, whether it is a reality that the Palestinian issue is still alive and kicking, and when I said that it has repercussions for everything, this is part of what I meant. It's not just, sort of UN resolutions and, all sorts of statements from world leaders about their commitment to a two-state solution or whatever. It's really the dynamic that takes, in this case, Israel and the United States, and the Israeli Jewish community and the American Jewish community on very different trajectories. And it's really the question at the end of the day is whether Israel remains a member of the community of democratic nations. I mean, you alluded, Flora, to the question of the backsliding of democratic norms, and I have a lot to say about how what we saw in Israel as was the so-called judicial overhaul or judicial coup that started just before the 7th of October is really tied neatly into the practices of the occupation of the West Bank, because the people who are now in government are essentially the architects of the occupation of the West Bank, and it worked so well for them in the West Bank, so they basically wanted to import those practices into Israel proper, which is something that Israel could have done could have prevented. I mean, the Israeli establishment, the relatively liberal establishment, has prevented successfully for many years. But once the establishment or the government is no longer liberal, there's this growth in that direction. And I will say another thing about what it means for American Jews. From what I hear, and people asking me as an Israeli who talks to this community quite often, asking me what can we do to keep especially the younger people engaged with Israel, to have like a meaningful Israeli content delivered to them, to have them to make them care and be knowledgeable as much as their parents were once, even though that's can contest that assumption. But I think that actually what the so-called disengaged Jews is actually a positive development. I think it allows American Jews, the younger American Jews, to look at Israel, not just in relation to the Palestinian issue, even though, as I said, I think it does play a major role in the political awareness in this sense. But I think that looking at Israel as just another country, I mean, that we care about and know about, and we have affinity for, and we have relatives, and we've been to on birthright, and we love the beach in Tel Aviv and the hummus in Jerusalem and all that. But I think that toning down perhaps the emotions when it comes to Israel might be a positive thing, both for these American Jews who have I think, a healthier relationship with Israel, and also for Israelis, because then this is where I agree with Olga. There was too much emphasis put on forces from outside dictating internal Israeli politics, and also how Israel sees itself. And if we tone down these tensions, I think that that also Israel could. Ooh, did we lose Olga?
Yeah, it looks like it.
Yeah. Oh, there might be a siren. I don't know.
Yeah.
So if we, I was just going to pass the baton on to her. But I think that if we tone down these, oh, there you are, Olga. Okay. I would say that yeah, it will be much healthier for both Israel and American Jews.
So I'd like to well, I'll start by saying that there's a lot of positive developments. I think that, again, people right now, they're concerned. There are a number of things that the Netanyahu government has done. He's concentrated a lot of power in his own hands. Even people who are maybe more aligned with his politics, have those criticisms of him. But I think in terms of the larger cultural context, I think that people have to see the positive, with all the discussion of violence in the West Bank or the rest of it. People, I think that's a part of the story. But there's a much bigger part of the story, is that there's actually an engagement with two serious barriers to any kind of peace, right? The first is that the Middle East is not Arab territory. This was, since the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the view of the Arab leadership, which is that the entire Levant, that includes Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, it's all Arab territory, and it will all be under Arab hegemonic territory. And that has broken, and it's broken de facto and theoretically. It's broken de facto in the Kurdish autonomous regions with the end of the states, and it's broken in principle with the Abraham Accords. That's what I call imperial rollback, and it's a sea change for the region that was not present in the early 90s, and that's an important context for a lasting reconciliation, not just between Palestinian Arabs, but all Arabs in the region and Jews. Okay, so that's a fundamental positive development that continues to take place despite what people's concerns are or what they think is about the escalation of violence or about the Gaza war. I participated in a conference which included Gazans and all manner of Middle Eastern Democrats, and we didn't spend any time on Netanyahu. The conference, the primary interest in the conference was on the Islamist actors and what can be done against them. So that's the first thing. The second is the religious, and I want to speak about the messianic. Every political movement, secular or religious, has a messianic component, including the French Revolution with its cult of reason. I don't think we need to be scared of this word messianic. It's just you want a better future, right? And the Jewish messianic view is in this world, not in the next. And it has a very naturalistic interpretation if you follow the Rambam, Maimonides.
I think the part that's scary is not. No, if I can just say this, the part that's scary is not wanting a better future, is thinking that your vision for the future is the only one, right?
I understand.
In pursuit of that, you can do anything. Yeah.
So I want to address that issue. That's the other thing that I think people don't necessarily see, but what's considered even among the Jews who live in the West Bank, or what they call, Judea and Samaria, there's a movement of interfaith work, and there's a movement, and on all of the national religious side, there's interfaith work that people are not seeing, and that, unfortunately or fortunately, and I think secular people, secular Israelis, ought to come to terms with this as well, is that when there is a religious reconciliation, and that includes about the most tendentious issues, which is the holy places, right? That's valuable even for people who don't care about them. I mean, if you're a secular Jew and you don't care about the Temple Mount, you don't care about Hebron, and you don't care about things, then you can find an arrangement where there's just a geographical division based on the 67 borders. But the thing that's true is that if you're a Muslim and you care about it, and you continue to have soul power and a view that of soul hegemony over these holy places, then you've been given a sign by God that meaning there has to be some integration of this issue, that the religious dimension, which was left out in the Oslo process. It came back with a vengeance with Al-Aqsa flood, right? October 7th. I don't call it October 7th. I call it by the name that Sinwar called it, Al-Aqsa flood, right? And for him, it was a religious duty, and he felt that he was going to take the crown for the Sunni world and for the Arabs in a project that includes all of political Islam and Islamism. So the Abraham Accords is with traditionalist Muslims. So traditionalist interfaith reconciliation is an extremely positive development, and it doesn't preclude all kinds of coexistence between Palestinians and Israelis on the ground, including with full citizenship. I'm not just talking about people who want Emirates without full citizenship. So there's different models and just different developments, and I see that as positive and coexisting very much so, not getting very much press, but coexisting very much with the more violent interactions, and which run both sides. So I would say that the American Jewish diaspora needs to know about that. I think that secular and Israeli Jews, I think that if you're disinterested or you don't like Judaism, I think that's fine. I'm one of those people who are grateful for secularism, for the freedom it gave me to choose, right? So I think there's a beautiful dialectic and dynamic between secular and religious Jews, which needs to be kept. But I think that we can't continue to pretend that Muslim replacement theology or a lack of any kind of sharing of holy places is going to work. It alienates too much of the Israeli population. It's too much of a problem in the Palestinian Muslim population. It has to be resolved. We have to have those difficult conversations. So call that messianic. I'll take it. I own it.
All right, so let me turn, to the other side of the tunnel now. You've given us a view of what it looks like from, Israel. And when you look at America and you look at the American Jewish community, and people are worried today, right? We just had an attack in a synagogue. The war in Iran is, right, causing a surge of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories online, as if there wasn't enough since, October 7 and so on. And so when you are in Israel and you're looking at this large and in many ways very successful Jewish community, but that's also very worried now. What do you see? What are the issues? What are the problems? Or maybe you think everything is okay. I'm curious what it looks like from your perspective.
You want me to take it first, or you want to go first?
No, go ahead. I'll speak later.
Look, I'm a big fan of the American Jewish community. I want to say, first of all, a big thank you. I had my formative experiences with Judaism in the American Jewish community. I spent 9 years in New York. I think I think it will go down as a wonderfully, beautifully fruitful diaspora, both in terms of internal Jewish developments, Reconstructionist Judaism, conservative Judaism, YU, Chabad. I mean, it's just very fruitful internally, and in terms of the engagement with the broader community, American Jews have been a powerhouse culturally, in all kinds of areas. And I just say, do your thing, American Jews. Keep it up. You've done beautifully. You've done a lot of great things, and been involved. Everyone I was like imagining if, I was imagining in my head this talk and thinking I'd be sitting in front of this very historic building. I mean, BJ is like celebrating 200 years soon, I believe, and thinking about who would be, there's an idea that, who would be all the souls of the American, even New York Jews who might be, around, and living and dead, everyone from, the radicals and like the great musicians, Dylan and Simon and Garfunkel, and anyway, the jazz, Gershwin, whatever. So I say to American Jews, do your thing, continue to be brilliant, continue to be outstanding, And as far as anti-Semites go, I think, it's just important to say that anti-Semitism is irrational. It has two components. There's a lot of players, and all you care about is the Jews, and that's not rational. And, Jews are doing a lot of things, and you can only think of negative interpretations. That's not rational. So I think we should call it anti-Semites, but I think that American Jews just continue to go about being confident and doing all the good things in so many different areas. That's one. And then in terms of Israel, I think, look, American Jews have a voice in Israel, right? They have a voice through their money, through people, and I don't mean through the money glibly. American Jewish contributions are important and valuable, and so you can express your voice, but that's the reality of political citizenship, is that until you move to Israel and you're a citizen, there's a limit to that. Just like the same thing in terms of what Israelis can tell American Jews. So I think keep the lines of conversation open, express your voice, continue to be brilliant. That's what I say to American Jews. And then I say also, I'm not worried about the anti-Semites because, I think Israel does have friends, and I think the anti-Semites are loud. But I think I also see, who would have imagined that throughout this war, that Muslim countries would remain in diplomatic relations with Israel? That's unprecedented, right? And not only that, a major Muslim country is giving oil to Israel, Azerbaijan. We are in a different world, and American Jews have to understand we're in a different world in relation to that. And so I feel Israel is strong. It's less isolated than you think. Even in Europe, there's an Israeli expression: "We're not the wife, we're the mistress" in Europe, because we're liked, but we're not talked about in polite company. But so I'm positive about that. And then about the anti-Semitism, I say to anti-Semites, stop wasting your time. You have and everybody's time. You have concrete policy things to say about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that you want to say to the American government, by all means do that. Otherwise, we have burning problems. And if you're spending months on end on university campuses for that, but you can't get yourself off onto a campus lawn for the environment. 50% of the goods bought in the United States are bought from third world produced countries where there are major labor issues. We have burning political, economic injustices that are global, that are terrible, that we need to deal with. So I say stop wasting our time to be anti-Semites. Gilad, your turn.
Yeah, well, I first of all, I would agree with Olga that I think that Israel's future is guaranteed. I don't share any of the concerns of many, both in Israel and in the diaspora, that Israel's days are numbered. It is a superpower in any shape or form, and in every single parameter you can think of, militarily, economically, socially, in terms of intellect, etc. Even politically, I mean, despite its many flaws. And I think this is something that could reflect a lot on the way anti-Semitism is perceived. Because, American Jews have had it, it better than I do. I've had it so good for so long. I mean, it was really the Golden Medina, the great place where Judaism could prosper both intellectually and financially and socially and in so many other ways. And I think that now what we're seeing is perhaps a little retraction on that front, and this understandably drives people to be worried. Now, it is still, we have to take it in proportion, and again, this might have some sort of repercussion for the way Israel is perceived. But when I hear that diaspora Jews, both from Europe and from America, are thinking about leaving their countries and move to Israel because it's the safest place on earth for Jews, I think that is absolutely a ridiculous assumption. Israel is by far not a safe place for anyone, least all for Jews, especially in relation to the United States. And what we saw this afternoon and several other occasions, at increasing pace recently, we see that it's perhaps less safe than it used to be, but at least imminently more safe than what Israel is and ever has been. And this brings me to believe that this angst is essentially, a thing of, a conscious thing rather than a lived experience. And I think that this thinking about Israel and life in the United States in this sense could enhance perhaps a certain kind of confidence in it, like taking things into proportions would allow American Jews to understand that the life here is still good and valuable. Going back to what we said earlier about the relationship with Israel, about the community of nations and democratic backsliding, etc. It's really, the question is whether we want to feel that Israel is part of us, to feel that this pride in a successful Israel that is perhaps successful in practical terms, but it comes at a price that some people are not willing to pay. And I want to say again what I've said. If you want to distance yourselves from Israel, that's absolutely fine. Don't think that by virtue of being Jewish and caring about Israel, it means that you have to take responsibility for everything Israel does, take responsibility for Israel's existence. Even, I mean, it's just. Yeah, I mean, a more intellectual and perhaps less emotional engagement, I think, would be more healthy. And what I want to say is that it's absolutely fine. It doesn't mean that, people who take who distance themselves and put Israel at arm's length are necessarily less care less about it.
Thank you. Are there questions from people on Zoom? I want to make sure we get to those.
Yes,
Yes. Okay,
we
great.
do have a few questions. I'll
Please.
start with one that came in regarding, I think this is more to you, Olga, when you give the regional frame and versus the Palestinian issue. And so the question is, what is your response to American Jews demanding that their money not going to arm Israel until it creates and recognizes a Palestinian state? And so that's a different call than, I mean, American Jews are not saying anything about, American money going to Turkey, right? There's a different economic relationship between the US and Israel, and the US and some of the other countries. So how would you respond to that?
Well, look, I think anyone can say whatever they want, meaning that I don't have an issue with people expressing their political, if they're a citizen of the country, expressing their preference for the country. I think it's just not going to make a difference because Israel has a strategic importance to the United States that is unrelated to what American Jews. I don't know why can you see me? And
We
can
can
you see
hear
me or
you,
did
but
my,
not see you.
I don't know why hold on, my camera's gone off again.
We can hear you.
We can
Okay,
hear
so
you.
I'll just talk. So it's not the matter of that condition in the current environment doesn't strike me as realistic. But putting the realistic aside, the question of why, I guess I would ask is why, to the American Jews, I would say at this point, why would you make that condition? And also Israel's moving towards military sort of arms independence. So I think, so my answer was, you can do it. I don't think for the moment it's going to have an impact. I think sort of a completely disarmed Israel is not realistic in terms of Americans' interest in the region. And then afterwards, I would say, is that a constructive approach when what we need to be doing is improving, the regional dialogue, also including the interfaith dimensions. So sort of demanding a right now two-state solution with a Palestinian political leadership that is the least, I mean, if you look at the different leaders in the region and the different possibilities going from Abraham Accords partners that are sort of more accepting of a multinational Middle East and a multi-religious one, the Palestinian leadership is, further behind on those things. It's less. So why encourage that? Why not encourage the regional developments that are going to move towards a lasting arrangement, living together between the two, whatever its political form, rather than a two-state solution now, which will be seen, I think, primarily as a victory for a kind of Palestinian Arab and Muslim political perspective that is not accommodating of Israel, but is accepted Israel's power for the moment.
Can I say something about that? I really reject this notion that two-state solution would be a victory solely for the Arab side or the Islamist side and the Palestinian side. I mean, obviously, a recognition of Israel is something that Zionism from the very early start aspired to, and this is something that is really a sine qua non for Israel's existence, because Israelis are not going anywhere, and state, in order to survive, needs to have diplomatic relations with other countries. I mean, this is really the whole point of having diplomacy and having, diplomatic networks. But also, I mean, there's one very crucial element here, and that is that the entire Arab world has agreed in principle to recognize Israel. Some of them have done it officially. Some of them, like Saudi Arabia, have been doing it behind the scenes. But for every intents and purposes, the entire Arab world has recognized Israel's right to exist, if you will. And it all really depends on the resolution of the Palestinian issue. And also another thing to say about the Palestinian issue is that it is not comparable to other minorities in the Middle East, because the Kurds in Turkey, for example, are not stateless like the Palestinians. I mean, they have a state. It's they don't like. It's Turkey, but they have a state. They may wish to secede and form their own state, but there are also other countries in exemplary democratic countries who want that, whether it's the Scots or the Catalans, and there's numerous other examples. The Palestinian issue really is not whether it's not what I want to say. It's not like a theoretical issue about political theory and religious observations. It's a very lived reality of people who are really deprived of the very basic rights. And going back to the question that we were just asked, whether about the implication of people giving money to Israel, whether it's privately or through their American government or any other Western government, this is something that really involves people personally in this issue. And if you ask me, I think that this is a great motivator of the anti-Israel sentiments that we've seen recently, or the protests, because people feel that they are personally implicated in it via their own governments, via their own philanthropic giving, and they want to say enough.
I just want to give a follow-up. My point is, why impose it from the outside now when there is a process that is bringing the Arab political leadership towards a reconciliation with Judaism in a multinational Middle East that is ongoing? But that's very much not, I don't share Gilad's view at all. It's not that the Arab leadership is very reasonable and is just waiting for a cowboy Israel to come to the table. I mean, we are still seeing Saudi Arabia and the Arab leadership and the Turks demanding that Syria remain whole, removing the autonomy from Rojava, right? And basically returning to a kind of Arab hegemonic position, including allowing al-Shara's, people under his umbrella, committing murder in minority areas like Sweda or the Druze. And I bring in this regional example in that we're not going to have a stable resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict without a stable regional architecture. And anyone who thinks that is not being realistic, because the Palestinians have strong regional partnerships with other states and always have had, and have had in every conflict, right? And I'm talking about waging the wars together or getting funding or military training, including most recently by Iran. So when there's a stable regional architecture, then I think the Palestinian issue is going to fall into place, including a stable architecture around the holy places. I do not, why are we expecting so little of this region? We are demanding of Christians to deal with their history with Jews theologically and politically. The European continent, it's not acceptable to be imperialist in the European continent anymore. Germany ruled for more than 1,000 years Eastern Europe, and they rolled back in that area. And there's no German political movement to control parts of the world where their presence is as long and historically as the Arab presence in the Levant. Okay, so why are expectations of the Levant so low? And that's really, so I'm saying don't put the cart before the horse. We are moving in the direction and in important strides. And Israel needs to maintain its leverage to make sure that those strides are really met and there's no backsliding, and that there can be and so that those are the conditions for peace, of mutual understanding and mutual respect, not an externally imposed two-state solution now, when we have, for the first time since World War I, a dynamic region where minority nationalities and where an understanding that this is a multicultural and multi-religious region is happening. So it's not that I want a good life for everyone. It's not that I don't have a kind of narrow nationalist view. I'm a universalist through and through. But I think that, I think the vision of universalism where the Jews still have to know their place in the region, and that we pander to Arab nationalism, we pander to Muslim replacement theology, which is what has been happening up until now, including pandering to Turkish imperialist designs all over the region. It's not a place that we should be.
I'll just say a very quick remark. First of all, I really don't understand how recognizing the existence of a Jewish state is in any way compatible with an Islamic replacement theory. But also, why do it now? I mean, the urgency of it is staggering, because what we see is really the outcomes of having to sustain the occupation and perpetuate it in its current forms, and it takes much and more energy and more violence to do it. And what we saw in Gaza is one thing. I mean, regardless of who's to blame, and regardless of whether it was a genocide or wasn't, the fact that there was this incredible outburst of violence has to do with the fact that this part of the conflict, you want to see it as in the broader picture, fine, but it is still there and happening. And what we're seeing in the West Bank, I don't know how many of you are following what's going on in the West Bank, but the practices of dispossession and even outright killing of Palestinians is something that has become under the guise of the broader wars, whether it's Gaza or Iran. I think that we're seeing all the time, and the plight of the Palestinians, who, the situation wasn't great to begin with, living under military occupation for almost 60 years, but it is becoming more and more acute. And Olga, what you're saying is fine. I'm all for a wider acceptance of minorities in the Middle East and the demise of call it Islamic supremacy or whatever. That's fine, but I don't see why the resolution of the Palestinian issue has to wait until that happens.
Are there
I
have more questions?
Let me put this other question.
We'll take another question.
Yeah, let me put this question on the table. There are a few. There's a follow-up to the one that was just asked, but since you mentioned the West Bank, let's stay with that for a moment, regarding the occupation and as you were just referring to, Gilad, the settler violence. And so, I think a lot of us in the United States, we have a real issue with that, and we do see that. It seems to be, at least, that is part of the messianism. So what do you have to say, Olga, about that, about the settler behavior and where that's coming from and how that needs to be addressed by the Israeli government, and also taking into account how American Jews feel about it?
Well, any criminal activity needs to be addressed as criminal activity. People need to be arrested and tried, and that's that. I mean, it's not a difficult issue in terms of the legality, and it doesn't serve anyone to allow criminals not to be to be put, to face justice. And then, so I don't have, difficult issue about that. I do think that the press about the settler violence, the extent of it, and the, quite frankly, lack of coverage of the ways in which the religious Zionist community, which is seen as the most messianic community, is involved in discussions and interfaith relations. I mean, I have personal contacts with religious Zionist rabbis who, have flown to the Gulf throughout the war, speak to Muslims around the world, and also, of course, locally. So the fact that that gets no press is a reflection of a certain vision. Again, going back to a vision of reconciliation between Palestinians and Israelis, where religion is not part of the story, and where there's a kind of, whether it's the Ehud Barak, the Israeli state is, kind of without East Jerusalem, and that and that's the kind of the easiest form. And I'm saying, even if you don't care about those things, the way forward is for a broader reconciliation. So, that's my and my answer to that is, if you're looking to see the good things that are happening, there's a lot of good happening. And as far as, just to add one more word, why the regional is so important, whatever the failings of Israeli intelligence and army with October 7th, the entire architecture of Sinwar's grand scheme was funded by the Iranians, the Turks, and the Qataris. This is a regional story. It was a regional war from the beginning. So, and it has to be resolved regionally.
So let me put another question out that I think touches on that as well. The role of American politics in Israel, Palestine, and the region. What do you make of the phenomenon that there is no longer bipartisan support for, or bipartisan consensus on Israel in a way that there was, not just a few years ago? How is that going to affect Israel? How is that going to affect this regional architecture that you're talking about, the role that America will play in without this bipartisan consensus?
Elad?
Yeah, well, I'll just say that, again, it might be a good thing. I think that a critical distance, when you're a writer, when you're an analyst or something, keeping a critical distance is always something that is good for your insight and your understanding of this situation. And I think it's the same here, that Israel is again debated in American politics. Maybe a good thing. It may not. I mean, it really has to do with the way American politics evolves more broadly about other issues other than Israel. But I think that Israel is, of course, a very major thorn issue in the way that, or a political wedge in the way it's seen between the left and the right in this country. And I think, if Olga and I are talking here, and it all has to do whether, in which direction the world will go, whether the rise of, or basically what Olga is describing in detail and with nuance is the decline of Western supremacy. That the shots are no longer called chiefly by the United States and the democratic West, but there are other forces emerging. And the way we used to think about it in the West until now is oy vavoy, right? America is losing its power, so all sorts of terrible and nefarious forces are gonna emerge and rise and fill the void. And what Olga is saying is that it's not necessarily a bad development. Now, what it means for internal American politics really is a function of that. I mean, whether the decline, first of all, whether there will be a decline of American power. And here I disagree with Olga. I think that even though the power of the democratic West is indeed declining, certainly compared to what it was in the immediate wake of the Cold War, but the fact that it's declining still doesn't make it weak. I mean, if you go back to what Prime Minister Carney of Canada said in Davos only a few weeks ago, that even medium-sized powers do have power. I think that the same applies in the reverse, that even a declining power is still a very powerful entity. And what it means for Israel will of course derive from to the extent to which the power of America will decline globally. People have been saying, have been lamenting the decline of American international power under Trump. I mean, right now we're seeing that it's not the case, at least not in the immediate aftermath. We'll see what will happen. What will happen later? But I still see great American dominance in the international scene for years to come, perhaps decades to come, and the fact that Israel will no longer be a consensus, as I said, might be a good thing, because it will be it will allow Americans to debate the relationship with Israel in a much healthier way, and also will allow support to be handed over when it's due, and there'll be a much more complex and elaborate game of carrots and sticks that I think in the long run will be a positive thing.
Two things. So that in relation to the bipartisan consensus, so I would like to say generally that it's a disappointing feature of the global left that they are in, and you see this increasingly in the Democratic Socialists of America, that they're aligned with the Islamists, and in to varying degrees. And I call it the Hitler-Stalin moment of the 1930s, which is when Stalin says, there's no difference between the Nazis and the British imperialists. They're all imperialists, they're all capitalists, and therefore I'm going to make a deal with the Germans, and I can keep my focus. And I think the global left understands that there are serious problems with the current order. The global South has a lot of failed nations. There's tremendous, heartbreaking economic and environmental injustice in this world, and it's killing hundreds of thousands, millions of people. And so we live in a very, very broken world, and that was not the promise of the post-World War II order of decolonization and nation building. We're very far from that, and it's very disappointing. I mean, disappointing is not really the right word, but so to me, though, it's sort of doubly tragic that the global left right now, which could be, for example, focused on multinationals, right? There's a very simple thing that people could do in Western countries of simply refusing to work with and putting sanctions on multinationals that operate with poor labor and practices in the rest of the world. That, with a market of just Europe and the United States, that's almost 1 billion people, that would be a game changer. These are the biggest markets in the world. There's so much the global left could be doing. And instead right now, and there has been this kind of focus right now in Israel and flirtation with political Islam, including regimes that harm women. And so I would say to parts of the left of the United States, where's your head? What are you thinking? Where are your priorities? So that would be my first thing. And then in terms of the consensus, if you choose to remain, aligned with the Islamists against American capital, then I think you're missing the historic moment. I think that I see very much Islamism is to the Muslim world, and Islamism, not Islam. Islamism kind of to the Muslim world what fascism was to the Christian, and it needs to go. And it's not helpful in any way. And after that, Europe saw the period of the best sort of development of nation building and left-wing politics. I mean, it's the great period of the development of welfare states in the post-World War II period. I mean, Scandinavia, all of that, the architecture of laws and workers' rights and protections and everything found their full flourishing in the post-World War II period. So I would say to the American left, figure out your priorities, because right now you are lost. And in terms of Israel, and having a focus on Israel as part of that being lost. I mean, if Israel were to disappear tomorrow, the major problems that should be concerning the global left about economic and justice and labor justice and environmental justice, and that would still all be there. It's not, and so and in terms of the United States, and in terms of Gilad was alluding to, I don't think American power is forever. Just like the British Empire fell, I think empires are structurally weak, and I don't think the American, nor do I think the Chinese will have the kind of reach. So, but to get to the question of the bipartisan consensus, it's a very dynamic time, and I think people should just continue to be free, do what they want, and that kind of thing. But my answer to the global left, which I feel a part of, is get your head out of your ass. Excuse my language, but I don't know what you're thinking. Where are you going with your politics right now?
Okay, I don't want to end there. I think we are coming up on time, but there have been a couple of questions about the current war. So maybe as a closing question reflection, if you could each share something that you think is important from your perspective for this audience to understand about the current war with Iran.
Gilad,
Since
you want to
you're
go
there, you
first?
should start. No, you're the local.
Well,
I've been outside of the country since the war started.
Look, as Felicia said, no one wants a war. Is not a good thing. But I really hope the Iranian people get their chance with this war. I know that there have been a lot of failed interventions, and everyone thinks about those. Afghanistan being the worst of them, I think, recently. But I think we should remember that, the autonomous region of Kurdistan in Iraq came after the also relatively failed Iraq invasion. But Rojava, the autonomous area in Syria, also came after an invasion and a defeat of ISIS. So let's hope that this particular attack has a positive outcome. And of course, the gold standard of invasions is Germany and Japan in World War II. So this is not an invasion, this is an operation against military assets. So let's hope that with a decapitated Iranian leadership and a degraded Iranian and their proxies degraded, that it's a new dawn for the Middle East and a new dawn for the Iranian people. And, that's the optimistic scenario. Gilad,
I also hope it's a new dawn, but from a very different perspective. As a friend of mine told me just the other day, that it's true that violence is the only language they understand, but thankfully it's also the only language that we speak. And I think that we need to understand that this current war, what's going on in Iran is one thing that there's a lot to be said about it, but I want to focus on what's going on in Lebanon. You probably know that Hezbollah, shortly after the attack on Iran by the United States and Israel, Hezbollah retaliated and has started firing at Israel, and Israel has retaliated since. And there's basically the front, the Lebanese front, is even more animated than the one vis-a-vis Iran. And bear in mind that this is, I think, less than 18 months after Hezbollah was allegedly completely obliterated. And it seemed like really the whole organizational structure of the militia of Hezbollah was indeed decimated, with the operation of the what do you call them? Those little devices, the communication devices that went
Pagers.
off. The
The
pagers,
pagers.
exactly. Thank you. Yeah, the pagers that went off and killed many in the commanding structure of Hezbollah, and then, of course, the assassination on Hassan Nasrallah and the other top leadership of the organization. And it was indeed a tremendous military coup, and the way it was presented by the leaders of Israel and many others is that it would guarantee peace on that front for at least a while. But what we're seeing now, that less than just a bit over a year since it started, Hezbollah has regained its operational and military capabilities, and is posing a challenge to Israeli civilians, but also to the army. I mean, it's really hard to pose a challenge to the Israeli army, but I mean, Israeli citizens have been living under fire from Lebanon for some time now. And what it means for us, for Israelis, and this is really a cause for despair for me, because I don't see that changing in the near future, is a realization that it cannot go on like that. That, even though violence is the only language they understand, it cannot be the only language that we speak, because even right now, I mean, the far right in Israel has been saying all these years, if we just let us finish the job, we'll finish the job. And there's one thing that we've seen both in Gaza and Iran and Lebanon, is that Israel has been given permission to finish the job, and the job hasn't been finished because violence cannot be the only language Israel speaks, and there's got to be more than resorting to military attacks. Now, well, where do we take it from here is anyone's guess. I hope that a decent and perhaps a rational leadership would say, okay, maybe there's, diplomacy is something that we need to engage in. I don't see that happening under the current leadership, but also there's an inherent problem that the more people feel threatened. I mean, going to war is sort of like a self-perpetuating system, because going to war means that you feel threatened, and being threatened means that you think more about, defending yourself in military terms, and less about alternatives to it. So how that snowball will stop rolling down the hill, I don't know. I certainly hope it will happen sooner rather than later.
Can I end on a note of a concordance between Gilad and myself?
Sure.
I think we both agree that diplomacy and peace are critical and important. So I think that's I sincerely hope there will be a time when there's going to be more than that. I look forward to having a weekend in Beirut with my kids and traveling to Damascus, and I don't think it's impossible. I do where I will say that whereas he is a pessimist I am an optimist in that we have many instances in history where the defeat of a bad actor has led to a period of significant peace, Europe being the most obvious of them. So we'll see.
We'll see. Can you hear Ratzon? It should be so. It should be so. I want to say a huge thank you to all three of you. And especially with the last minute changes of this program. We're sorry we were not in person, but this was really very rich and I think very different perspectives than most of us in the US here. And you've given us quite a lot to think about. Yeah, we're very glad to have had you as part of this series, and grateful for all of your time and all of the work and the thinking that you are doing that brought you to this conversation tonight. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, everyone,
Shabbat
for coming.
shalom. Stay
And
safe.
Shabbat shalom. Yes.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, Flora. Thank you, Gilad.
Bye-bye.